Welcome to the Teach Joyfully podcast, where we talk about all things elementary teaching with some mom stuff thrown in. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of five. I'll be your host. Thanks for joining me. Today's guest is someone you're really going to enjoy. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation, and I'm going to apologize in advance because already I know it's going to be a long conversation. So if you need to break it up, I get it, but you're going to want to listen to the entire thing. So let's dive in. I'm here with Laura Cornish, who is a speech and language pathologist in schools. She is not only that, but she's also my sister. So here we go.
Hello.
Hello, Laura. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. I have such admiration for all the things that you do. I think that there's a lot of value here, and teachers are going to really want to hear what you have to say. So today we're going to be talking about helping kids who have special needs in the classroom and how do you manage and help them be successful. So I would say so many students have trouble with self-managing and self-monitoring their own behavior these days. Emotions can run high for both students and teachers, and then things kind of spiral out of control. So some students seem almost doomed to failure sometimes, or even get labeled as problems when in fact there's a lot of other things going on that might help them be successful if we understood them. So let's talk about some examples of behaviors that students might have.
Okay. So I specialize in children with autism and other special needs, but particularly autism. And I have to say, if you work with autism, you've seen every single behavior that could possibly be there. So if they do it, then if you can handle that, you can handle any kid in the class probably. So different kinds of behaviors. I would say I could categorize some of the behaviors like avoiding work or refusing work, having difficulty with transitions, and then also refusing transitions, leaving the group during group work. And of course, there's always the kids who have difficulty paying attention or spacing out a little bit, impulsive kids, and then just talking at inappropriate times, calling out.
And then there's just a few. There's plenty more, aren't there?
Yeah. At the worst, probably the hardest ones are when they have outbursts, hurting themselves or hurting others, and then destroying the classroom, obviously.
Sure. And repetitive kinds of things too. Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. And that can wear on you. Part of it is understanding what's going on in order to be able to help them and smooth things over in the classroom for sure.
Absolutely. And for every behavior, there can be a multitude of reasons why the behavior occurs. And the key to success for the child and for yourself is to figure out why this behavior is going on. And we can't always get in the kid's head, but we can make a good guess, an educated guess about what's going on, and then try out different strategies that match. So we can't apply one strategy to every situation, even though it might be the same behavior.
Right. Different student, different circumstances for sure.
Right.
Sure. But you have to have some sort of a framework for at least approaching it, especially for teachers who maybe aren't trained as thoroughly as, a specialist is. So here we are. And certainly all of those are behaviors we've all experienced as teachers. When you're not trained for all of those kinds of issues, then, where do you even begin? What kinds of reasons are there that students do some of these things? I mean, we know obviously that some of them are, something could have happened at home, and they, got out of the car and their sister tripped them or whatever, and it just sets the day off. That can happen to anybody.
Right.
And being able to recover is really hard for some students. And, but there's a million reasons why, other than like things like that, like the things that could have happened in the home or on the way to school. What other kinds of things might, just a few things that might kind of set some of this stuff off?
Well, I think the key to understanding this is to kind of get to know your students individually before you even dive in too deep into the school year. And one of the suggestions that I have is to create sort of a background information on your children. And I know teachers go into cumes and do that. But that's really surface. Of course, you want to know if they have diabetes or, autism or whatever. But I think also one of the things that I have done is to send home a survey to the parents. And I'm providing you with some example questions of what you might send home. And you can send it home, obviously, virtually or a paper copy. And then just get the information that you really need right away from them. And also, you can do a child survey. If you're working with kids that can write, you can have them either do a checklist or fill out some answers. Or for younger kids, you can send it home with the parent to do a little interview. So I think those pieces will give you so much information. And then for those special kids where maybe you don't have the support or there's just a long history, you might want to do a short little interview or survey with the previous teacher. I've created a little chart for a student, a sample chart for a student to get a little profile. And I think if you take a look at that and see what kind of things that I have outlined as important for me when I work with students, that you can put in the strategies fairly easily. So let me just kind of talk about what kind of things you want to know from a parent. Like, for example, what do they like about their child? What I like to know, what one or two things would you like to improve? Because sometimes the goals you have or the things you see are also at home or they're different. Maybe the parent's priority is not math. Maybe the parent's priority is liking school. And so you could learn a lot, I think, from knowing that. And then when you get to your parent conference, you're going to have a whole different conversation and not be broadsided. So I think this is really important for all kids. And then with kids with ADHD, with autism, with other special needs, that's really telling. Sometimes those kids have a difficulty communicating, and it's the family that sees over and over these issues and things that come up, and they really can help you the most. And also, if the child's been in school a few years, then the parent can also tell you what's worked with them in the past and which teachers had a strategy and then what happened when they didn't use it. So those are super helpful. And then I always ask parents about homework. What is homework like? Do they refuse? Is it a crying session? Do they do it independently? So just getting an idea of what the family dynamic is and how they perceive the school home relationship.
Wow,
Um,
I really love that. I think that's amazing. And yes, I think we do that already as teachers to some extent, but maybe not to that extent, which really is helpful to have all of that information because you are right. When you get to parent conferences or even when, you're just chatting with the parent briefly here and there, you're having a very different conversation than you would normally have, for sure, for sure. And then when problems arise, I think you're approaching the conversation differently because you have a different set of eyes and a different, even just a different heart, when you are approaching that conversation saying, well, I know this has been a goal of yours. And so here's what's going on, and
mhm.
versus this is what's happening, which is completely different, right? Completely
Yeah,
different. Yeah.
absolutely. And honestly, as a parent myself, early on, I had a teacher once ask all the parents to write a letter about their student, and I loved it. So I think getting a survey home is not a chore for them. It's really an opportunity to connect with you. And, obviously, there's some parents that have just survival needs and they may not return it. So, you go with what you can get from other sources. Or, maybe if you really need it for that student, you do a, phone call. But I think that that's huge. Obviously, the previous teacher, everybody knows to go to them, but maybe just to have a little survey prepared that you can just email out quickly so you have it on hand. And I did give a list of possible questions for that. As far as the student survey, the most interesting things you can find out about them is, what they like about school. Do they even like school? And then I have a little checklist like, do you like PE, recess, math? And sometimes you'll see patterns during different subjects, and you can kind of tell ahead of time, oh, they hate writing because they've checked that, right? And then even have them write like, what would they like to improve? Maybe they want more friends, or maybe they feel that they need help with writing or another thing. I always ask kids, do they have friends? Does anyone bother them? Those things you find out, after recess every day, or maybe you don't even
Loud
know
and
until like,
right, right. And
right.
it can be loud and clear, but sometimes they don't tell you. And it goes
Exactly.
on and it turns into something really bad because everyone's quietly retaliating.
Exactly. Yeah. And their perception is not always the same as what's really going on, but it's good to have their perspective because, again, you're going to understand their behavior because you know their perspective. And then, just asking little things about their home life as far as like, what do they like to do with their parents or their siblings, or what do they like to do in their free time? And if it's just video games, you're going to know, which kids put video games and which kids put, going out and playing with their siblings. And so those are good to know. I think, when you find children who are on screen time a lot, that sometimes their social skills will be lacking. And so that's something to just understand when they're having behaviors. What can you teach your class, as a whole class, just embedded in your curriculum when you see, oh, I have 50% of my class that's on video games all day.
Right. Well, and that's nice to be able to see trends like that in your class because then it is a wider need. And so it makes more sense to teach as a whole class versus,
Absolutely.
small group or a couple of individuals. But if you know it's a larger issue, you can even bring in some help, bring in a school psychologist or bring in some specialists or something from your school that can help you develop a plan for that and assist with that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as specialists, we obviously are very busy, but we also really, really like to connect with teachers on our individual students. And so if a teacher came to me and asked me, how could I work with this? Or can we connect so that your therapy, works on this as well? And I am so happy when that happens. I had, for example, a teacher who sent a child down with a note. He had an outburst in class. And what had happened, he came and he sat and we talked it through. And then I was able to get his deeper perspective of what had happened and talk him through, like, okay, maybe your perspective wasn't 100%. And this is what, possibly happened, and then come back and relay that to the teacher. And that, went really far as helping his behavior the whole year. Because let's say, for example, he had weekly outbursts where he would lay on the ground and cry. And then following maybe 3 or 4 of those consultations, it went to like once a year.
Wow.
So, and then the following year, not at all. He was able to just come down and knock on my door. So, having that other person, whether it's a counselor, psychologist, speech therapist, whoever they connect to, not just consults with them, but also goes back and consults with you.
Right. And it's a team effort. But I think it's so easy to get caught up in our 100 miles an hour in our classroom and feel like specialists are very busy that sometimes,
Yeah,
we kind of dismiss that as an option. Or maybe we just get busy and we forget. And having that top of mind can be very helpful.
absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes the person is the child's previous teacher. Maybe
Right.
they just go and sit in their last class and do some work in the back, with someone they trusted, whoever it is. Every child needs a safe place. And sometimes that's a classroom, but sometimes there's other issues going on with either other children or a subject that they just freak out about. And especially for children who elope from class or have huge outbursts, if they have another place on campus that they consider safe, another person who is willing to take them as they are whenever they need it, that can really teach them to self advocate and to learn to not go to that behavior, but ask for that safe place. You
Sure.
know, whether it's your little in kindergarten, a little library area that they go to, or whether they have a counselor or another person on campus, maybe it's even the principal, or just sitting in the office. But what I try and teach kids after they run away the first time, I talk them through, and then I'll say, we need you to be safe. Probably in the bushes and on the playground is not a safe place when everybody's inside. I want you to run to my classroom and I will never be mad at you. So they know it's safe, whether they've done something wrong or whether they are afraid. They can come in and feel like they're going to be heard, they're going to be understood. And it's important also to keep your own classroom like that, where we as teachers dealing with a lot of kids at once, it's very easy to become frustrated when behaviors happen. And keeping our voice neutral and sending out the message of what the expectations are, or to stop and reset in a neutral tone rather than yelling, will create a safe place. And remember, maybe you're yelling or upset with one child, but the other child across the room who is fearful of anger will be affected by that as well. So you're creating a safe place where your voice stays neutral, and that way every child in the classroom will learn to trust you. Probably also, when we call out a particular student's name often, Johnny, sit down. Johnny, get back in your seat. Johnny. The other kids start to say it as well. They mimic. And then all of a sudden, Johnny is the bad kid. When the kids go home, they say, Mom, Johnny, this has far reaching consequences for that child. So, we need to find another way besides calling out the child's name. And there are definitely strategies for that.
For sure. I'm all for dealing with students individually and avoiding any kind of public shaming. And it's not that we're intentionally doing that. It
Absolutely
just
not.
it just happens sometimes. It just happens because it's the fastest, most expedient way, and we're clear across the room. You have to kind of think that through in advance. And I always tell teachers, you need to have a plan for think through all these different situations that you encounter that frustrate you. And then let's create a plan for each one of those situations in advance before school starts. And then as the school year goes on, if there's a new one, well, then, okay, well, now we need a new plan. But having a
Not if,
plan,
but when.
right, that's right, having a new plan or whatever the plan is for each one, and having actually prepared your words in advance so you know what you're going to say and practicing them, because sometimes what we would say in a calm voice might not be something we would normally have said right away in that situation. But if you're in a situation where you're frustrated or angry, if we already have practiced something, then your brain will default to that a little more likely than the other direction. And so it's just kind of we're setting ourselves up for success as well. And so I'm
Yes,
all for
absolutely.
practicing that in advance.
I agree. I think getting your whole class strategies ready ahead of time, and just even if it's overwhelming, but even if you pick a few new things that you're going to do at the beginning of the year, is going to really help you feel more confident, and you'll see it in your students as well. And some of them are easy. Some of them you just work right through, within your day and within yourself. And other things take preparation. One thing I like to think about is, like, for example, creating a daily schedule chart or a way to keep the class informed of what's going to happen throughout the day. Maybe you are somebody that's going to go out, write it out, laminate it, and all that, and put it on a chart. You're going to have that for the rest of your career. So the time is well spent. Maybe you're going to add something here and there, but this is a strategy that will reach pretty much every student. Now, there's those kids that, can learn in any situation, that have great home lives and all those things. They still will benefit from it because they're going to learn organization and agenda from you. But the kids who have stress or anxiety in their life, those students, and especially kids with ADHD and autism, anxiety is part of who they are. They live with anxiety. So having that to count on every day really, really helps them to get through the day, and to know one of the things that experts say with autism is that they need to know what work, how much, and what happens when I'm done. So those things help. Again, you work with autism, you can work with anyone. These things help all of us. You go to a conference and you want to know exactly what's going to happen in this conference and when do I get my break. And also, how is it going to relate to you? So putting that schedule. Now, if you're working virtually, maybe you use slides, Google Slides or PowerPoint, have the schedule on the first slide and go over it with your class so that they can see, what are we going to do? What's next? And when is this over? When do I get my break? You can even put little brain breaks on the schedule in between some of the lessons, and the kids will look forward to that. They'll know, oh, I only do this and then I get a brain break. That's fun. And I think those kind of things are super helpful for all of us. And even you'll find for yourself, it'll help you keep yourself engaged with the students in taking responsibility for their own learning and what's happening next. If they
And
have to depend on you verbally for everything, you're not building independence. So when you
no,
give them
no.
visuals, then
And
you're building that,
yeah,
you
and
know?
I'm all about building independence for sure, for sure. That
Yes,
is to me one of the entire goals of teaching is that we don't want kids to be dependent on us for every little thing. When we do that, we're not actually teaching them what they need to know because we're not going to teach them every single skill they're going to need to know in life. We're not. It's just not going to happen. And we can't teach them every piece of information and they're not going to remember it all, but it's the process that we're teaching and the process of how do you learn, how do you take responsibility for that learning? How do you take responsibility for yourself? And how do you figure out, how to move forward in life? Yeah.
exactly. Yes. And I can't say this enough. Visuals help build independence. Verbal directions build dependence. So if you are saying, Johnny, sit down, Johnny, sit down, he's going to wait for you to say, Johnny, sit down every time he gets up because that's your routine. But if you put a little thing on his desk, a little label on his desk that says stay seated, and then, some sort of little like incentive on the bottom, and you have a little conversation and say, you're responsible for this. This is the one behavior I want to see. And every time you're doing that, I'm going to come over and say, yes, high five or whatever you're going to do. And then he gets to print out a picture of his favorite Star Wars character at the end of the day or whatever. It can be super simple. When he gets out of his seat, you can just tap that or go look at your label, and he can remind himself. The more you refer to it, the more he's going to just notice it when he sits down. And
My
the more
gosh.
you're positive with the outcomes, he's going to be so proud of himself. So those are just little things, how a visual gives him control. Because
I
sometimes
love
kids don't
that.
even know what goal you're working on with them. Tell them, right?
It's
Tell
news to
them.
them, right?
Yeah,
It is, yeah,
exactly.
that's right.
And you can tell them more than once, or say in the beginning of the day, ooh, remember what we're working on together? Oh, yeah, staying seated. And I like to say that we are working on together.
Yeah.
Because you always want to put yourself on the side of the child rather than facing each other. So when a child's having trouble, I picture myself standing next to them, helping them, rather than across from the, even if it's just a visual in my mind, to go forward together with this behavior. We're going to work through it together. I'm here holding his hand, helping him because it's hard for him or her. And so, how can you put yourself on the child's side
Yeah.
rather than making them do it? Because you can't make them.
Well, no, you have no control really. You don't.
Right,
But, it's like trying to, when you potty train a child, it's the same thing. You don't actually have any control over that.
right,
you're
right,
just you're
exactly.
just trying to help them learn and figure it out for themselves, but you don't actually get to control any of that. And
Right,
I think
right.
that becomes very frustrating for parents. It's the same thing with teachers in the classroom and all of these behaviors. We have no control. We really don't.
Right. We
We're
don't.
just
Yes.
helping them learn the norms and take control. And that's when the magic happens because you've created, I guess, this long term benefit.
Right.
We always have to look into the distance and we can't just look for today. If we're looking at
Right.
today and I want to fix this minute, then we've already failed. But if we're looking into the distance and know we're training long term, then it's a
Right.
success. And I love those two things. So I want you to repeat them again. So one is I like that idea of looking in the same direction with the child, that the two of you are walking side by side. So you're walking with the child, but then the other one, say it in the words that you use, the idea of visual.
Yes. Visuals build independence. Verbal builds dependence.
I've never thought of it in those terms. I certainly do understand that. And I think that's something that I understood, but maybe not to the extent that you're explaining it. And I think that is
Yeah,
really
and if you're
important.
working with, obviously, this works for your whole class. So
Yes.
if you're working with a student with autism, this is especially true for them because, well,
Language is a barrier.
it is. Language is a barrier. And also, anything written down tends to be a rule to them. So
Ah,
for example, I was doing some play dates with some children with autism, and I would write down some things that we could possibly do during the day for them to choose. But at the bottom, I would write rule, no video games during play date. And they would now ask. I wouldn't have to
oh,
say it again. They would tell
wow.
each other, the rule is we can't play video games. So just state the obvious and make it in writing. Then if there's a kid who's begging you for this, write the rule down. And it just becomes, you don't have to say it. Oh, look at what it says here.
Right.
The board is telling us, not me. It even takes the blame from you,
Right.
right? They're
Right.
not angry with you, the teacher or the parent. They're like, oh man, that rule.
Darn it. Well, and it's interesting because when you think about it, and you have something like that that's written down like that and kids see it,
Mhm.
it is that way for pretty much everyone. It's like, oh, that's the rule,
Exactly.
and it's much easier for everyone to get on the same page. But boy, does that eliminate the broken record, which is something that I hear about from teachers all the time. I am so tired of being a broken record with this child. And if you can get them to understand and see that this is what's happening and this is the rule, you can eliminate a lot. Now, it may not work for everything, but boy, if it works 50% of the time, I call that a win.
Right, exactly. I would say, there are a lot of little strategies that you can do whole class like this and just think ahead. Now, when you're going online, you're going to have to come up with new rules. And some of the things that I have had difficulty with online were that I'm going to give my students some of the rules are going to be like, okay, keep your face close to your device. Show me your eyes. You need to be sitting at a table or a desk, not in your bed. Prop up your device ahead of time so you don't have to hold it. It's not wobbling all over the place.
Right.
No virtual backgrounds for me. The kids always disappear into the virtual background and then come back. And I'm like, I don't know where they went. So I'm putting a rule, no virtual background. And then the usual listen with your eyes and ears. And I like to tell my kids things that seem obvious to us as adults, but again, in writing and also saying it, what you see and what you hear should match what you're thinking about. So you seeing and hearing, but you're thinking about your snack, that's not listening, right? So we can't control their brains and what's going on, but you can write that rule down. And then when they start talking off topic, you can go, wait a minute, is your brain matching what we're doing? Or you can, is that what we're talking about? I think it's going to be tricky for me when I'm going to be doing groups to establish a method for choosing students to answer. It's different from the whole class,
It is.
and it's easy to get kids unmuting themselves, or if you know how to control that and not let them mute or unmute themselves. But another thing you can do is try choral repetition, which you can have your whole class repeat directions, important information from a lesson. And also, one thing about choral repetition, I do this with my speech groups. When, for example, we're learning, what's a noun, for example. I'll say a noun is a person, place, or thing. We'll make it a chant and I'll have them all say it. And then I'll say, like we said it 3 times, and I'll say, Johnny, what's a noun? And then he says it. And I say, Susie, what's a noun? She says it. So there's a 100% success rate, right? Kids answering questions, you're going to have the same kids answering questions all the time. Your shy kids are not going to answer, and your kids that are lost are not going to answer. So, how do you get them to participate? Well, if you have them repeating the information rather than testing them, you're going to reduce the anxiety and you're going to have 100% participation. So, that shy child can speak without being isolated and they can feel part of it.
Sure. Well, and I think that builds confidence too, and even confidence within that situation. So if you did later on want to ask a question and have kids answer, you might have kids that wouldn't normally answer volunteer because now they're really comfortable because they've had success. And so if
Right.
they do know the answer, they're more likely to speak up versus
Yes.
before, you didn't build that success in before. And so if you do it, and to be on camera and on microphone, it's just like when you're suddenly on a microphone and you're speaking and you hear your voice for the first time. It's like you hear your voice amplified. It takes you by surprise the first time,
It does.
because you're not ready to hear yourself at that volume. And
Yeah.
I think in the classroom too, to hear yourself on your headphones, sometimes a little disconcerting, especially for kids, because it's this out of body experience almost.
Yes. But this works also in the classroom too.
Sure.
I think it's important to focus on everyone versus, checking individual kids to see if they know it, because it's like a test in public
Right.
when you ask kids questions. And there's a big risk that kids take when they answer questions. So when I teach, what I like to do is have everyone repeat it, just the most salient pieces. I want you to know this, you know, and I'll have them repeat it and repeat it. And then later on, in the lesson, I can go back and ask that question to 10 different kids and they'll know it. And it
Right.
doesn't have to be that super smart kid.
Sure.
We really want to get away from the idea that some kids are smart and some aren't. And those labels happen because we ask individual questions.
Sure.
And that's fine to have kids feel good about themselves, but we need to create a way for everyone to feel good
Right.
about being able to participate.
Right.
That's how
Well,
you reach the whole class.
right. Right. So in the classroom, I might have kids whisper to a partner so everyone gets a chance to answer.
Yes, you have a lot more flexibility in real life than you do online.
For sure, for sure. And we do a lot with individual whiteboards. So you can all answer and hold your answer up,
Love it.
things like that. So you could still do that piece online. That's easy. Even if they don't have a little whiteboard, they can use a sheet of paper and on a clipboard or something, and they can write their answer or draw a picture and hold it up. And kids
That's awesome.
like doing that. It's really fun. And
Mhm.
so they're more likely to answer that way than they are if you're calling individuals. But I always like to see asking questions. To me, the purpose of answering questions isn't a test. The purpose of asking these questions is to get a temperature read on where we're at. It's
Exactly.
me evaluating, how is this going over? Are we understanding? Are there holes? Do I need to help fix up a little bit and shore up the defenses a little bit
Right.
versus, really testing? And I don't think our intention ever is to really test, but it does become that for sure.
Right. I think teaching is such an art. It's such a skill, and that we're constantly having to evaluate our own behavior in order to improve. Of course, we get feedback from our class, but we're an integral part of that, and our own behavior is so entwined with student behavior.
I think reflection feeds into that because we aren't evaluating our own behavior every second consciously. And
Right.
sometimes we are, we're going, ooh, that was a miss, right? Um, at least it happens to
Yes.
me. Like,
Yes.
whoops, that was probably not a good
Right.
idea. I won't do that again. That didn't work so well. Whatever it is, but a lot of times you have to go back and think later and
Right.
about self-evaluate a little bit and say, you know what, that didn't go well. Why didn't that go well? And think about what happened and what the
Absolutely.
interactions were. And I think because of that, self-evaluation is so very important.
Yeah. And
Otherwise,
absolutely. And what worked too? What worked? I
right,
love to remember the things that worked with students so I could do it again,
right,
because sometimes you have a little breakthrough with someone
right,
and
right.
that really
Well, and I
helps.
tell teachers, because it's easy to beat yourself up, I say 2 wins and a grow. And so if you can find
Absolutely.
2 wins from the day and a grow, then we're doing good. And so that narrows down self reflection down to something that's very doable, and it doesn't become a pity party or a,
Right.
beat myself up party,
Right.
because that can very easily. We're very critical of ourselves a lot of the time. And so, if you can come up with 2 wins and a grow, it's fast, it's easy, and you're out the door, as opposed
Good
to,
job.
wallowing in it, which
I
is
really like that.
never good. Yeah. Yeah. I'm all for more positive than negative, but we always need to grow.
Yes. Yes. Would you like to talk a little bit more about autism in particular?
Maybe we just talk a little bit about like directions and consequences and things like that in that
Okay.
context, just because I think it can be different. And yes, it can apply to other students as well, but it can
Mhm.
be different. Like things that you would normally do may not be as effective with someone who has autism. And there's reasons why. And sometimes it's very confusing because teachers look and go, what the heck? And they don't know what
Okay.
happened.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So let's
Yeah.
talk a little more about autism.
Okay. One thing that I have learned about autism over the many years that I have worked with these students is every single one of them is different. They will come up with a different variety of behaviors. Some will be able to do one thing, and then you'll expect the next one to be like that, and they're totally different. But they all have one thing in common, and that's the key difficulty for autism is a lack of perspective taking. And the second thing would be difficulty understanding the context cues in a situation. If a student with autism does a certain behavior, what I always ask myself is, what did they miss socially? What did they miss? What did they not understand? They can't see, for example, what the other child needs or is thinking or why they're doing this particular behavior. How can I explain that to them? Rather than consequence or going straight to telling them, don't do that. Help them to understand. You'll get these amazing breakthroughs with people with autism just by helping them understand perspective. And you'll see their behavior change when they do understand it. Now, sometimes, like I said, with that one student we talked about, it took 3 or 4 different sessions for him to kind of get the idea of how to solve this problem, not by having an outburst, but by finding a safe place. But by giving him the tools and then giving him the idea of having someone help him figure out the perspective, that really, really helped. For example, I had a student who I met this year. He's 7th grader and he always ate lunch by himself. And the whole school accommodated him. He got an end of a separate table away from all the noise and everything. And he was a sweet kid. Everyone liked him. Not a lot of bad behaviors, but he really didn't have a lot of friends, at least, on his free time. They were nice to him during class and PE and everything, but he didn't really have like good connections. So, what I did one day is I sat down with him and I asked him, why do you eat by yourself? And it took a little bit of talking, to get through. But the reason turned out to be he thought the other kids were busy. They were busy talking to other students. For some reason, in his mind, for example, if you think about mom's busy, she's on the phone. Well, they were busy doing whatever, talking to each other or whatever. He wasn't able to place himself in that perspective. And I said, well, no, they're not busy. They want to talk to you. This is what you can do. You can talk to kids while you're eating. They would like that. And I said, if I can find 2 kids who would like to sit with you, would you go sit with them? He said, sure. And then the next day, he was sitting with students. So he had spent 7 years eating by himself because of this lack of perspective taking, rather than everybody assuming it was a sensory issue or
Oh
that
my
he
gosh.
wanted to be
Is that
alone.
just heartbreaking?
It is heartbreaking. But on the other hand, with students with autism, what I like to think about is you can improve their lives so much by listening and paying attention to how they think. And it's really rewarding to work with them after you get that idea. It can be very frustrating and you think nothing can change because the strategies you use with some kids or the assumptions you make about people that usually are true are usually not true with autism. You have to go back to what did they miss? What are they not understanding? Even, for example, I have a group of students with autism, and one student, 7th grader again, came in and he would go around the room and touch everything in the room. And I would ask him to sit down, wouldn't sit down. Okay, it's time to start, wouldn't come. His aide, his assistant would say, come sit down. He wouldn't sit down. Wait, wait, wait. I just have to look at this. So then we had a little chat. And when he finally sat down, I said, look at my face. How do I feel right now? And he had a hard time. And I'm like, what do you think I was thinking while you were not sitting? And took him a long time, but he thought frustrated, mad. And I said, I was, frustrated. I was waiting and I needed to get this work. Why do you think I was frustrated? We kind of went through the whole thing until he understood why I wanted him to sit down and why his perspective was not the only perspective in the room. So they're very much like little children in their own heads, and the only perspective they have is, I want this. Everybody else's brain, as far as they know, are exactly like what they're thinking. So they don't understand. Why don't you understand that this is so cool and I have to look at it? Like, everybody thinks that because I think that. So they're not able to get out of their heads to see, oh, I like this, but so and so doesn't, but this person needs this. So they're not able to take in all those social cues. So again, it's coming down to getting to that. And I like, again, to use the visuals. You'll see kids with autism often don't have good eye contact. A lot of them don't understand why. Why are you making me look at your eyes? I don't care about your eyes. Why? I'm looking over here. Well, we have to teach them not look at me, look at me, look at me, but what do you see on my face? How am I feeling right now? Or how is that student you just hit? Look at their face. And what are they feeling right now? Wait and let them think. And when they see it, they'll realize, because there is a human in there, they are people, they have feelings, they care about others, but they don't understand outside of themselves.
Right.
So when you say, look at their face, and the kid is really sad, they'll go, oh, like it's a big surprise.
Because it is to them.
Yes, it is.
It is. It's not that they were being unfeeling or uncaring. It was simply that they never thought to look there. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want what I want, and this is what I want. And then they see what the reaction was like, oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah. They don't look at people's faces because they're not getting information. Our facial expressions are really more subtle than what you can put on a picture. When you do those little emotions pictures, they're so exaggerated. But really, a little bit of eye raise is a very subtle thing that other people catch that could mean a lot of different things. Or, the eyebrows especially are something that shows us a lot of different emotions and little cues that can be like, oh, that kid doesn't get it, and just a big widening of the eyes. Well, they'll miss that completely. So teaching them over and over, look at my face. How do you think I feel? Teachers are allowed to have feelings. And again, this works with all students. Once you see how it works on those students, it works with all students.
Sure.
And so when you have a kid who's just impulsive and they hit someone else, talking to them about it and saying, look at that other child's face. You kind of force the situation, and your typical kid will be able to get it even faster. They'll be able to get to that idea because they already understand perspective taking. So just forcing them into the idea of like, why is this important? And yes, the other kid does have a perspective, and maybe I need to change my behavior. So just walking kids through that one thing is one strategy that works with autism. Another huge strategy that I use, and you can do this whole class, like for example, a visual on a whiteboard or smartboard, you can draw stick figures with speech bubbles and thought bubbles. And even just setting up, for example, your rules at the beginning of the year. Let's draw a thought bubble. What's the teacher thinking when the student is out of their seat, And then the thought bubble, what do you think the teacher's thinking? Oh, she can't teach. What does she say? Go sit down. Oh, okay. So getting through that first stay seated rule in your class for your little kids, if they see that visual of stick figures, it's cement, right? Then it's cement.
And we act them out like we do them wrong, we do them right. And the kids, we have a giggle over it, and so kids help. And that is beautiful. But I think the stick figures is another strategy for sure.
Absolutely.
And that
the role play is amazing,
maybe
though.
First time you do the role play, but then on subsequent days, because I always say you have to train your class for the entire first month. It's not a week, it's not 2 weeks. You have to an entire month. And some classes it's longer than that. But you're going to train them every day for a month, and you're going to do maybe not as long of a training in subsequent days, but to have stick figures and maybe do it as a poster or something that you can pull back out and say, okay, so remember this.
Right.
And now let's talk about that again real quick. Especially, and even when a rule is maybe kids are having trouble with it, you
Mhm.
come back from a break or something, say, you know what, we're really struggling with this. Let's pull this poster out and let's talk about that. I think it's
Right.
brilliant.
Yeah. Or you can even have the kids draw it. Okay, this child is having trouble with this rule. Why don't you draw me a little cartoon of the right way and the wrong way? You
Oh,
know,
I love that. That's
you know,
awesome.
they can
Yeah,
remember. If they don't like to draw, they can do stick figures or they can look online for a picture or whatever it is. So
sure.
giving them again some connection to it. Some of the other things besides the agenda or the schedule, when you are starting class in the beginning of class, there are certain things you can do as a whole class to set up the lesson for success. So, what I like to do is tell my students what they're learning, like just what's the goal. So they know it's not just math time. But today we're learning double digit addition. What are we learning? Everybody chants it, right? So if I ask them halfway through the lesson, what are we learning? They can answer that because they're just sitting there and they're just blobs following verbal directions. And
Sure.
then when they get home and there's homework, and some of the kids ace it, and some of the kids are like, I don't know, she didn't teach us. There's parents that'll say that. And it's like, wait a minute. We
I
spent a
learned
half an
nothing all day, right?
right? We even did number one together. So again, having them, what am I learning? What are we learning? We're learning, and having them go back and saying that. So again, stating the obvious. And then I also will say, like, hey, especially for little kids, I need you to remember this tomorrow. Because sometimes there are some kids that will think, okay, I did it. And that's the last time I'll have to see it. Those kids that don't remember from one lesson to the next, there are some kids you have to say, we're going to use this again tomorrow. I'm going to ask you this particular question tomorrow. What is a noun? You tell me tomorrow. And they will. But if you just kind of assume everybody knows that lessons build on each other, then you'll miss some kids. So I'm always checking. They know what they're learning specifically, and they're repeating and telling me what the important pieces of the lesson are. Break it down to like 2 or 3 steps and have them just memorize those little pieces. So there's just things for memory and for independence that you can help kids with.
Nice.
When you get to behaviors, refusing, those kinds of things, try and figure out why. Why is a child refusing? And then you can go back to your student profile and remember, okay, this kid has autism or this kid has diabetes and when he's low, he starts refusing. Do I need to have him go to the office and check his levels, send him with someone? Sometimes it could be a child that doesn't usually do that. And it could be, they're really tired or they're sick, things like that. So, really like trying to figure out, okay, this child always has trouble during writing time. This is when they start to yell. So, I'm going to sit down with them and say, why do you yell during writing time? Ask that obvious, just like that kid who wasn't sitting with anyone, right?
Right.
So why do you yell? What? And they might say it's hard, or I can't do it, or I'm no good. And that way you can listen. Okay, did he say he's having trouble with confidence? Okay, I can work on confidence, right? So I'm going to put sentence frames in. I'm going to have him check the first one with me, and I'm going to say fabulous. I'm going to start verbally rewarding every little bit of effort versus correction. I'm going to reduce my corrective feedback, things like that. So if we know it's confidence, then we just put in more support. If we know it's like, oh, this child's sensory doesn't like the feel of a pencil, we'll let him pick what he wants to write with. So there's different reasons. So kind of getting down in there and figuring out why this is happening. And then communicating that with the parent, going back and forth. some of the things when you do, for example, your rules for certain things, send all that home to the parents so they can reinforce
Sure.
um,
Sure.
and
It's
get that.
also information for a parent. I think as a parent, for me, if I
Mhm.
maybe I didn't pick up that they have a sensory issue where, they hate the feel of a pencil or they hate the feel of a crayon. Maybe I didn't pick that up. But if I know that, then in subsequent years, I can say, okay, in the next year, I can already let the teacher know this is an issue. And it may go
Right,
away over time, but I can say, hey, last year this was an issue, so you might want to be watching for it. I think it's better, but I'm not sure. So if you get into this refusal, that's probably why, and try this instead. I'm already setting my child up for more success later on because now I know that this is a
right,
problem. But if I don't, no one tells me, I, as a parent, I'm not picking up on everything. There's
right,
things you're going to see as the teacher in the classroom that I might never have clued into.
right.
We can't catch it all. We just can't.
Yeah. Another thing you might even find out, for example, a parent is forcing them to do extra work at home and write, and they're having big crying spells, or maybe homework is really terrible experience.
Right.
So you can again like start from the beginning, go back, and then build that confidence
For
uh,
sure.
and help the parent go, okay, I'm going to back off. We're not going to do any writing except for
Right.
little bits with sentence frames until a week from now. We'll change it
Right.
up. Yeah.
Right. And the goal, I think, for parents, so often there's so much pressure. And so it can feel like, you want your child to do well and you want all these things. And so we do things that we think will be helpful in setting our child up for success, where sometimes we're actually making it worse or we're hindering him or we're giving them a negative feeling about school and learning unintentionally. And so to have
Absolutely.
somebody give us that perspective very gently, but just have someone give us that perspective and say, look, maybe you want to back off on this a little bit so that they can
Mhm.
take a breath. And it's working that partnership that you can trust me as a teacher. I promise your child will really learn this year and they will learn everything they need to know. And you don't have to worry so much. I think if we can take some of that pressure off parents, it'll be a relief to them too.
And so many kids have ADHD these days. They have similar issues to kids with autism, but for different reasons. So, for example, the lack of perspective taking with autism is a key feature. And that sometimes happens with kids with ADD, but it's more because they were paying attention to something else rather than they don't have the ability to take the perspective.
Right.
So the impulse control and the difficulty processing information, all of that kind of makes them look like some of the behaviors, but they need different strategies. You can use the perspective taking strategy with them, but then they're also going to need feedback, immediate feedback. And that's a key feature for ADHD. So, for example, Johnny, you're out of seat again. Johnny, you're out of seat again. You're going to put that visual in and you're going to start doing the positives and working together and everything. But also, you're going to need to give them immediate feedback. Now, it can be every time they're up or every time they're down. So, I would choose kind of a little bit of both, but what you want to do is have at least like 3 positives to every negative you give a kid. So, wow, you're sitting. I'm so proud of you. Come back, walk around, see your class. You're still sitting. I'm so proud of you. Maybe it's 2, 3 seconds later, but then it's like their brain falls asleep. So they can't remember what they were doing, and that automatic behavior just starts again. And so when they get that, like every time you give them feedback, their brain wakes up,
Well, and you're
so
retraining the brain for a different behavior, but it takes time to retrain those habit patterns. And so, what does the brain do? Well, it likes the big highways, so it's going to go to that behavior
yes,
automatically until you build a better highway. And that takes
right.
time. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes they will have all kids, but kids with disabilities in particular will have a long history of failure with certain situations and behaviors. And so there'll be avoidance. It may be all different. It might be a subject, it might be socially, or it might be relationships with teachers. They may have this feeling like it's inevitable that this is going to be a failure. So we have to change that with different ways of giving them success in small little increments.
Sure.
And then, noticing those tiny little things like, wow, all your materials are on your table. nothing's on the ground, something like that.
That could be a big deal, though. There are kids that's exactly it looks like a bomb went off and everything's around them, but there's
Yeah,
the center part's clear.
exactly, exactly. And you can be very specific with a particular kid. You can only have three things on your table. Wow, you only have three things on your table. And
Right.
again, it's write it down. It's a rule.
That's right. Love that. Oh my gosh. So we're going to run out of time here, and I have a couple of things I'd like to touch on here. So
Okay.
let's talk about briefly tone versus message with
Okay.
kids.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about using a neutral tone with kids. And the reason why we use a neutral tone is that once you start using an emotion, that's the message. That will become the message. So if we say to a student, why did you hit so and so? That's unacceptable. Then the message is shame, shame. You're bad, there's shame. Versus, I'm really disappointed. That's okay to say with a neutral voice. I'm really disappointed. We don't hit people. Then they can hear you. Even if you say the exact same words, but your tone is different, they're going to hear the tone over the the message.
So that neutral tone takes that as a factor out so that the message can ring clear versus
Exactly.
confusing the message with the tone, which is, of course, what kids hear first.
Right. And when you're working with students with autism, they will feel anxiety, obviously. Well, all kids will feel anxiety with the tone, but also they'll take your words literally. So if you say, why would you do that? They might be thinking exactly that. Rather, it's kind of a rhetorical question, right? Like, well, I did it because he has my stuff, and so it was justified versus getting to a more productive, like, what else could you have done? What are we going to do next time? What do you think we should do? Let's figure out how we need to
Right.
resolve this,
Right. Right.
giving the consequences. And it's important that children with disabilities get consequences, the same consequences most of the time when there is an extreme behavior. You made a mess, you clean it up. That assistant is not cleaning up their mess. That assistant, it might help them a little or, encourage them, but they're not there to do it for them.
Right.
I think the tone is huge. You don't have to address something right away when you're angry or when you're upset or when you're frustrated. You can say, okay, go over there and write down what happened and get
Right.
yourself ready, read
Go
it,
get your stick figures and your thought bubbles going.
Exactly. Exactly. Get yourself some clarity. It's
Right.
not an emergency.
Right.
Emergencies are bleeding, not breathing, those kind of things. So when
Yep.
kids have outbursts, it's not an emergency. It feels like it, but
Yeah,
it's really not.
for sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about just this idea of what about when the work is too hard? How do you even discern that? But then how do you help them when a child is feeling really overwhelmed and it's not what you're asking them to do isn't matching their ability at that moment in time? So sometimes, they might be able to do the work and other times they can't. And there's reasons for that as well.
So you're saying, like, for example, a student with disability, is that what you're thinking? Or
Sure, a
any?
student with disabilities. So you have a student with
Okay.
disabilities, and the same task one day is they're totally unable to do it the next day. And it's not because they can't do it, but there's other things going on.
Okay.
So you might be, they were able to do it, and now you're frustrated because they did it yesterday and they can't do it today. And so now you have this disconnect in your brain going, what the heck happened here? Right. But
Okay.
there's other things going on for them.
So, students with disabilities, I mean, they're just like other students. They come with all the same possible backgrounds that are out there with your other students. So, they have the same things that could be going on with them. They could be sick, they could be tired, they could have home life that's not supportive. All of those things can go into and confound, I would guess you say, with your ability to understand what's going on with a child. I always go back to ask the student. It's so obvious, but we don't do it. Come to them in a gentle way and say, what's going on? How come this is hard today? Usually they'll tell you,
Right.
they will usually tell you. If they don't, if they just say, I don't know, or it's hard, then deal with it being hard and just take that for face value. Sometimes it's hard means a lot of different things.
Sure.
But what you can do is, for example, with, let's say, writing, say, okay, tell me your sentence. And then you tell them the first two words that they said and they write them down and say, okay, I want you to finish the rest and I'll come back. So breaking it down a little, you can take a highlighter, highlight a couple of things that will help them. What I do with directions is I try and just put extra things on the written page. For example, a number one, if the directions all in a paragraph, a number one and highlight the word, a number two and highlight the word. So it comes more like bullet points for them.
Sure.
Another thing that I'll do is I'll draw from the direction. If it says use the word box, I'll draw an arrow to the word box because they don't look down the page. It makes no sense to them. Or if they're just having like a difficult time altogether, then maybe having them take a brain break and then come back. Set a timer. Okay, we're going to take a brain break for 5 minutes and then we're going to come back and do this. And then I'm going to give you another brain break. Just show them you're supportive of that time. Now, it seems like, well, that's not fair. All the other kids are doing, or he's not going to be able to get it all done. You know what? He's not going to do anything. You're going to get more than you would. And I know teachers feel a lot of pressure to make sure kids are learning it every second of the day. And when they're not productive or they're just, you're not getting to them, it feels like a failure for the teacher, but it's really not. It's really about, like you said, a process. Like, is this going to matter in the next grade that they did this assignment
on this
or
day?
Is it going to matter that they learn to work through their frustration?
Right. And that's exactly it. It's perspective, isn't it? It's that idea of the long haul. And this is the bigger skill they're learning right now. And sometimes that's more important because that's going to help them be successful long term versus successful on this worksheet.
Right. Yeah. It's important also when you give a direction to a student, they're at a point where you just have to say, okay, you need to do this or this. This is going to happen or this is going to happen. You need to give them time to save face and walk away. You walk away and let them think, because if you stay, there will be a power struggle and that you will lose. So when you give and when you come down to having to give a two-pronged consequence, walk away. You say, I'll come back, neutral tone. I'll come back. These are the things that are going to happen. I'll come back and then we'll see what you decide. And give them space. A lot of times they'll just choose the right way, but if not, be prepared to implement consequence. Okay, you're going to send it home for homework.
Yep, that's right. But then it's their decision and it's not on you. And they don't have any reason to be angry with you because they're the ones who decided. And It's very obvious to them and to you. Whether or not they like it doesn't matter, but it's very obvious. Yeah, I like that very
when
much.
You get into a pattern where, okay, they're always choosing to send it home for homework. That's when you get ideas from other teachers or things like that.
Yeah, you bring in the cavalry.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to deal with patterns of behavior with more thought.
Yeah.
If things start happening consistently in the negative direction, that's when you plan for individual stuff. But when you take care of your whole class strategies and your tricks in your bag first, and then put that time in with those patterns.
Yeah. Okay. So one last thing, and then we probably need to wrap it up. One thing that I have had several teachers ask me is, how do I deal with the outbursts? The children with autism a lot of times have these outbursts and they may happen regularly. Maybe they don't. Some of it's controllable, some of it's not, and so how do you deal with that? And at what point do you say this child needs to go somewhere else for a little while?
Well, there's different degrees of outbursts. And there are different reactions that you're going to have depending on what type of outburst and how often they come up. If a child is having the occasional outburst because of frustration or whatever reasons, perspective taking, this or that, you want to try to teach them another behavior. So when I'm feeling frustrated, you can even write it down as a rule. When I'm feeling frustrated, or they call it social stories for kids who, you can draw pictures and read a little story to them, maybe ask the speech therapist or someone else who is familiar with those to come up with a little like plan for them where they can, okay, sometimes I feel frustrated. I don't like, or I see everybody working hard and it's hard. This is what I'm going to do. I will try to raise my hand and get help. I will try to. And then we work towards that behavior, the replacement behavior, raise your hand.
Okay.
There's other times when there are physical outbursts. Either they're eloping or laying on the floor, crying, yelling to the point where they tip over desks or whatever other types of things happen. If you get a student who is running away, you need a plan for safety, and you most likely need a person that you call first. And you'll need to have a team basically of people, and then just establish with that child after the whole thing's over, establish where's the safe place, like we talked about before,
Right.
so that we can keep directing them there.
Right.
When there's a physical outburst in the classroom, there needs to be a team that comes in and allow you to keep teaching. Sometimes it's to the point if you're worried about safety, you will need to evacuate your class and have a team come to take care of the student, de-escalate the student. Taking away the audience, whether the child has autism or not, is a huge step. If they're able to walk outside, they're cognizant enough to walk outside the room with you and talk it through, that's better than in front. If they won't leave, then your class has to leave, even if you just have them go out in the hallway and wait till someone can come. And then if it's a pattern that someone can come up with a strategy for, this is why it's happening and this is what we're going to do, you can try that. Make sure you try it diligently. And it takes a long time. If the student eventually needs to go to another placement, it takes a long time. So plan on using those strategies. There are times when the child's behavior is telling you the whole day is too hard. This is overwhelming. Their sensory is, there's too much going on. They're lost, especially kids who don't communicate verbally. Maybe they just say no, and they don't have a lot of other explanations.
Right.
Behavior is a communication.
For sure.
It is telling you. And when kids can't communicate, they'll use behavior. So that's one talking point you can use with families, is being very sensitive about, I see anxiety in this child. It's most likely a sign of anxiety, or, a constant feeling of like being on edge. What's going to happen next to my sensory system? Yes.
Right.
I'm being forced or corralled, or all these other type of things that can happen in a child's brain. So talking with parents, like, their behavior is telling me this is overwhelming. Their behavior is telling. That's the way to talk about it with families, because just saying he does this, he's always this, using the words always and never are very, very hard for parents to hear.
Sure.
I just don't even use those words at all.
Yeah.
Predicting the future, I don't do that with parents. He's going to break something, he's going to hurt, I don't do those kinds of things. Being very, very sensitive with parents to help them to get the right place for their child. That you'd be surprised how some behaviors can be corrected, but when kids are getting hurt, or there's a potential for you to get hurt, typically that's when an assessment needs to happen. If it's a pattern, get them placed in a place where they feel confident, safe, and successful.
Well, we could go on, but we really do need to wrap it up. So I would just say thank you so much. I think this is really helpful. I think everything that is in here is of great value to teachers, and it's just a different way of thinking about things. Even if you take away as a teacher, two small things out of this, it's a win. It's a win. And it will help you across the board. I do agree that not just with children with autism, but it will help you across the board regardless, with any child who's having issues, for sure. If you were going to say top 3 things that you need to do, and obviously one of them is communication, right?
Yes.
What other 2 things would you say are really important
For
dealing with kids with autism?
I think I would say understanding their perspective, figuring out why and what makes them tick, and then viewing yourself as their teammate versus their disciplinarian, their really, get yourself on there as more like a coach in
Yeah.
terms of behavior.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I so appreciate you being on the episode. I do. Now, you have a book, actually.
Yes, I have a book. Yes.
So tell me about your book.
So my book is called Groovy Kids, and it's kind of a workbook on social skills and perspective taking. So if you have students or even parents want to work with their kids on conversation skills, social skills, assertiveness, aggressiveness, this is kind of what we were talking about, stick figures in pre-prepared pages that will help students to understand the social rules, those cues that they will miss in those
Yeah.
basic situations.
Yeah, I think
So,
it could be really helpful for sure. Awesome.
yeah,
Well, we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes to that so everybody can get a hold of that if they decide that's something that they need. And thanks again.
I
So that's it, my teacher friends. We're out of time and I'm out of breath. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you liked today's episode, I'd love it if you'd go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave a review. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Also, you can continue the conversation online with me in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully Podcast Community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in today's episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. So until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.